Let's get started. Gerrymandering. So, what's going on? Why are we talking about that, Katie?
Oh God, there's so much to talk about. So in 2020, we hit our 10 years where we have our census, and every 10 years we redistrict our congressional districts and our state legislators in most states. But these laws are really hodgepodge across the country in terms of who's in charge of being able to redistrict and what the process is for doing it. So some states have really nonpartisan efforts like Iowa, whereas some legislatures are literally redistricted by the legislatures themselves, which has caused a lot of issues, especially in states like Florida and Ohio and other pretty valuable swing states.
Yeah. Virginia actually recently approved an independent redistricting commission a few years ago. So, just a little brag about our own state. Sorry, Katie. Katie's from
Ohio
Ohio.
Ohio did too. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
We
but did they
passed
actually?
redistrict.
Yeah, but
Did
did
it
they
work?
actually? Did it work?
No. No. Did we try? Yes. Did it work? No.
Yeah. I mean, what is kind of funny is that the lines in Virginia are definitely more representative than they were, but it does mean that my parents are in a red district now.
Oh, were they not
They
before?
were not before. They were not before.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah. They're actually in our district technically, this district right here. Um
All
so,
the way up? Damn.
yeah. So one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to the process of gerrymandering is that the Supreme Court in the past has ruled that the courts have no business in telling states whether or not they can do partisan gerrymandering.
Mhm.
However, they have affirmed that they're allowed to step in if there is racial gerrymandering. The problem is sometimes it's a little difficult to tell the difference between that because so many voting demographics are heavily based on race. So black people
Mhm.
are significantly more likely to vote for Democrats than they are to vote for Republicans. Now,
Mhm.
because of that, it sometimes makes it difficult to prove specifically that the redrawing of this district was explicitly racist versus explicitly partisan. Now, effectively, it is racist, but are you going to be able to convince the Supreme Court of that? And is the Supreme Court going to buy that, considering that it is a 6-3 majority for conservatives?
But the bigger question is, are states actually going to respect SCOTUS ruling?
Yes.
And that's something that I think we need to start with this week.
Yeah. Because
Uh,
in a shocking turn of events, the Supreme Court actually, I believe this was back in October, actually declared that Alabama was too racist.
yeah. Yeah, I think the ruling came out in like June. It was one of the biggest cases of the session. It was Allen v. Milligan.
Yeah.
And it held up the voting rights section, section 2, which was one of the only ones that really hasn't been decimated by the Supreme
Yeah.
Court in the past.
Yeah. Sorry,
And so
there was a
big win for
closed
progressives.
yeah, there was a closed door meeting in October between Kavanaugh and Roberts to discuss
Yeah.
this, and then the ruling came back later, which is kind of interesting because
Yeah.
based on what I've been looking at, as much as on the pod we're not the biggest fans of Brett, I like beer Kavanaugh. Um, he has apparently in the past at least paid lip service to the idea that racism might still exist.
Huh. Funny, right?
Yeah, he's even cited like To Kill a Mockingbird as one of his big inspirations as a judge, like and Atticus Finch as being one of his heroes, which I didn't know that about. I didn't know about that before looking at this, but yeah. Um, so Kavanaugh and Roberts actually joined together in a majority decision to reject the Alabama maps that allowed for only one majority black district, despite the fact that like a third of the population of Alabama is black. So
Yeah.
how'd that go, Katie?
I wish I could tell you it went well, but it hasn't gone well. And this is like a last day or two kind of update that's been going on. So basically, Alabama said, fuck the Supreme Court. We're just not going to implement what you said that we should do. And so they reintroduced pretty much like the same map, just reheated, with only one majority Black district, basically saying, screw whatever rulings were done. We're not listening to you. And they're actually trying to get it back up to the Supreme Court so that they can like maybe try to overturn it and get them to have a different ruling, which honestly is just like so shocking, but like also not unexpected. And I heard some discourse going on Twitter earlier this week. X, if you want to call it that. I don't call it X because I hate Elon Musk.
The X Twitter, I guess.
The X Twitter. I don't know. It was just really interesting discourse about like how Republicans are just so, they used to be rule followers, but it's almost popular these days to like disregard court rulings and federal court rulings in order of just doing what they want and hoping they can get away with it. And it goes well over with the base somehow.
Yeah. I don't know if I agree that Republicans have always been rule followers. Just
They try to be.
I mean, they try to posture to be, but yeah, like I remember when the marriage equality ruling came out, the Obergefell came out. There was that clerk, Kim Davis, I believe was her name, that specifically refused to issue marriage licenses, whatever, licenses in her district, and Republicans were lauding her as this huge hero, despite the fact that she was blatantly disregarding rules. So I don't know. I'm not sure I completely agree that they're the big rule followers, but yeah, to Katie's point, they were explicitly told you have to have at least 2 majority Black districts. And they were like, okay, well, we know you said that, but we're just not going to do that. Let it go to the Supreme Court again and hope that we get a different ruling, which I don't like, considering the fact that it's pretty much literally the exact same map. Do you think that Kavanaugh's going to flip?
God, no. No. I mean, like, honestly, I don't even think it'll get to the Supreme Court like it did last time. I have a feeling that, I mean, the court has the ability to reject cases that they don't want to pick up. They literally just ruled on it this past session. I don't see in any way, like any world, why they would want to like rehash this.
Yeah. And one of the lower courts has already rejected the map, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means that
it's confusing.
If it does get appealed to the Supreme Court, then, or if the Supreme Court rather rejects it, then what that means is that the lower court decision is going to stand, which means that they'll have to throw out the map and redraw it. Now, one question I think is also that should also be asked is are they going to be able to draw up a new map in time for the next election? And maybe that's part of the strategy.
Oh, it's absolutely a part of the strategy. And I can tell you it's because Ohio did the same shit this past year.
so talk to me about what happened in Ohio.
Oh, God, it's such a long story. So back in 2017, 2016, Ohio passed a statewide gerrymandering, redistricting ballot measure. It basically created a like nonpartisan with heavy quotations, may I keep in mind. This like commission that was made up of legislatures. So I believe it included the governor, the secretary of state, majority leaders from the House on both sides of the party. And I think that there were like 2 other people. It ended up being like a 5-2 Republican split. So like Republicans having 5 members on this commission, Democrats having 2. And to pass any kind of map, it had to go through the public. They had public hearings, and they had the ability to like have maps from other folks heard and presented and proposed. And for it to be passed, it had to have at least one party, like one member of the minority party, sign on to it. But the Republicans were greedy like they were back in 2010, and they gerrymandered the shit out of Ohio's not only state legislature maps, but their congressional maps as well. And it was really looking like it was going to be passed there for a second. But then the Supreme Court, which had a Democratic, like it had a Democratic majority for the first time in a very, very long time. It doesn't anymore. But it was holding up the bill from the maps from being passed because they said that it was unconstitutional constantly. They were like, it's not doing it. Like the maps, like these maps aren't following the rules that like the guidelines came to. And then time, like they pretty much just ran the timer up, if that makes any sense. Like
Yeah.
they just kept taking these maps that were getting rejected and rejected and seeing if the court would just like budge and say, okay. And it got to the point where there were supposed to be March primaries, and the March primaries couldn't even happen because they didn't have agreed upon maps. And so the primary got moved back until May, hoping that they could come to some kind of conclusion by then. But then for them to even be able to send out, ballots to military folk that are stationed overseas, to be able to have absentee ballots opening, to be able to have mail-in ballot time, you have to have so many days prior to the election. And so the court eventually just said, we have to have these maps. And they chose these maps that the Republicans drew, and it wasn't agreed upon. And so they're technically unconstitutional. And the court has said that they're unconstitutional. But for the sake of being able to run the election, they ran on unconstitutional maps.
Wow, that's dirty.
It's a very, very shortened version of this absolute chaos that has been going on in the state of Ohio.
Wow.
And the worst part about it is that like folks in Ohio, I've done a lot of work with ACLU of Ohio, and I know a lot of folks up there, and I know that they've been really trying to fight to see if they can get new maps for the 2024 election. But it looks like right now the same maps are going to be used.
So basically that is the strategy for Alabama then.
It probably is. And honestly, like, I'm not saying that it's right, but I am saying that it's working for Republicans, unfortunately.
That sets kind of a scary precedent. Like,
Oh, I know.
basically that means that, so it is rare that the Supreme Court actually says, y'all are being so fucking anti-democratic that we're going to throw out this map. It is very rare for them to do that. But on this one occasion in which they finally do that, they finally actually make a good decision, Republicans are still rejecting it. They're still refusing to follow it, and they're running out the clocks, and they get to use their map. Like their original map that was rejected for being unconstitutional because it was so fucking racist that even this Supreme Court said it was too racist.
Well, the Supreme Court of Ohio.
Yeah.
But you know what's some problematic stuff there?
I was talking about Alabama.
Oh, that's
talking about
true.
Alabama. Yeah.
That's true. In Ohio, Mike DeWine is our governor. His son sits on the Supreme Court and refused to recuse himself from any of the gerrymandering cases.
Wow.
Even Mike DeWine recently came out and said that he supports having an independent redistricting committee because of how bad it got last time.
Did he
this went on for like a year? No. Supreme Court in Ohio is publicly elected.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was about to say I'm not sure I wasn't sure exactly what the process is in Ohio, but I was like, wait a minute, is that this guy didn't appoint his son, did he?
No. He was publicly elected, but still he didn't recuse himself from the cases, which is just like so crazy to me. And Ohio is just the funny thing is though, is that the original maps that they created, they were expecting to be, there were like 3 super competitive districts, and somehow Democrats did okay in 2022 in terms of like congressional seats. They thought that it was going to be a 12-3 split, which for Ohio, a swing state in the past, leaning a little bit more right these days, but still not significantly enough to be justifying giving 12 seats to Republicans and 3 to Democrats.
Yeah.
It actually ended up being a 10-5 split, which is still like 2/3 Republican. Like, and that doesn't align with voting charts in the state anyways.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I know I've made this point on the pod before, but this is just the classic Republican strategy that we've been seeing recently, because their policies have been getting more and more unpopular. Because,
Yeah.
you can make the argument that to some extent on cultural issues, there are definitely pockets of the country that have moved farther to the right. But on economic issues, like, we have seen a consistent move to the left on various issues such as minimum wage, such as healthcare, um, such as such as health, education. We've been seeing a consistent move to the left, while the elected Republicans have been moving further and further to the right on these issues. And if you can't win by having better policies, the way that you win is by disenfranchising voters. And that is exactly the strategy. Now, I do want to just be clear. I'm not saying that Democrats don't gerrymander as well.
Oh God, yeah. Look at New
Democrats,
York.
yeah, look at New York, exactly.
Look at Maryland.
Yeah, look at Maryland, look at Massachusetts. Democrats absolutely gerrymander, and anybody that says differently is lying to themselves.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a larger amount of gerrymandering on the right than on the left. And in the aggregate, it benefits Republicans more than it benefits Democrats. Now, with all of that being said, I think there's one kind of interesting question that I know that Michael and I have talked about on the pod, but I want to hear your take on it, Katie.
Yeah. Yeah.
There have been some people that have made the argument that because Republicans are going to gerrymander,
Yeah.
and they're never going to take any principled stances against it. They're going to gerrymander because that's just part of their electoral strategy. Is it then a responsibility for Democrats in blue states to also gerrymander in order to basically make up the difference? I know that Michael and I have talked about this before. I want to hear your take on that.
It's like such a tricky question because, like, fundamentally, I don't think that they should gerrymander or gerrymander to the extent that they are, or like could potentially do if they have control in certain states. And honestly, I think that we can look to a state like Wisconsin and what's been going on in Wisconsin to really like show what upstanding like or what could happen, because like there are some states that do have really great redistricting commissions, and honestly, personally, I think that there needs to be something on the federal level in terms of
Oh yeah.
yeah, because it's so awful having all these states having such mishmash laws and nothing's that's absolutely regular. But I know that Wisconsin recently passed a redistricting law that would have like an Iowa type style where it's drawn by like independent map makers, and there isn't like the legislature isn't really involved in it at all.
Yeah.
And its goal is to create competitive seats. And honestly, I think that's a great idea. I don't want to live in a district where it's like super like, oh, it's going to go to the Democrats because I'm in downtown Columbus, and so my vote doesn't matter because it's so diluted with Democrats, or same thing, vice versa. Like there should be competitive races if there can be.
Yeah.
But this was introduced, but then Republicans in Wisconsin pulled some shit this past week.
Yeah, didn't it?
I don't
Wasn't
know.
it like there was a Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin that was against that was against gerrymandering, an anti-gerrymandering judge, and the state legislature basically moved to try to get that justice's district like removed. It was something like that.
I don't think it was exactly that. I believe so like a nonpartisan group was supposed to redistrict their maps, and they went through the Supreme Court in trying to have it be done through like I think it was their like legislative commission thing, which is still in the state house technically. But then the governor was like, Tony Evers was like, absolutely not. We do not trust any of the redistricting to be done by anyone in the legislature, because he doesn't trust Republicans to behave. Like he straight up said that he was like, he doesn't trust the GOP.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested to see what happens because he's pretty much just he's putting his foot down and saying like, no, we're gonna have independent maps, whether you like it or not, and your attempt to try to maintain control is gonna lose. And they're gonna inevitably, especially on their state legislature level, they're definitely gonna lose seats, Republicans, if it's independently drawn because
Yeah.
Wisconsin's maps are
Yeah.
messy.
And they're actually, so there is a Supreme, I just pulled this up. There is a Supreme Court justice.
Is there?
Um, I don't know how to pronounce this last name. It's Janet
Yeah.
Protaskewis. And the Republican state legislature is actually trying to get her removed from office because of her opposition to their
Of
redistricting maps.
course. Didn't
Um,
she hasn't she, like, not even been able to rule on a case yet because they've been trying to, like, impeach her?
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't read that specifically, but that seems in keeping with um I
I'm pretty sure I read something about that this week.
yeah. So I would here's what I would say to kind of that question of should Democrats be doing this too? I
Yeah.
think that if you're going right now, it is very easy for Democrats to make the argument that they are the pro-democracy party and that Republicans are the
Yeah.
anti-democracy party, given the fact that Republicans are like a lot of elected Republicans are still refusing to condemn the fucking insurrection. Um, the fact that there's still a large contingent of elected Republicans that are consistently trying to pretend that the election was stolen, it is very easy for Democrats to paint themselves as the pro-democracy party. So if they take a principled stance against gerrymandering, then they can keep making that argument. I mean, everybody hates gerrymandering. You know,
Yeah.
regular citizens, when we're talking about the electorate, Democrats, Republicans, they hate gerrymandering. All right. You explain
Oh,
it to
yeah.
them, they say that that's just the pinnacle of corruption. All right.
Yeah.
Democrats need to be the party that people associate with being anti-gerrymandering. All right. Because
I agree.
there are so many people that are just so disheartened by the political system that they will see what they will see what the Democrats are doing, and it's going to make them, I think, more likely to support them. Also, another thing that we've been seeing, to Katie's point earlier, it is actually better to live in a more competitive district, and not even just competitive district, but competitive state. Because what we often find is when you have a heavily red state, that kind of gives the Republicans in that state a license to be as dumb as possible because they're never going to lose because they have an R next to their name. And when we see heavily blue states, we often see Democrats basically view it as a license to be as fucking stupid and fucking corrupt as possible because they have a D next to their name. But when we see states such as Minnesota, which is a very like evenly split state that is slightly blue, it's slightly blue of purple, they have done more with a 1-seat majority in the Senate
Oh,
than
literally.
New York has done with a fucking supermajority.
Yeah, no, it's like Tim Walz. I saw this take back when he first announced like everything that they were doing and all these packages that they had passed. And he had something to the point of like, we're not here to collect political capital over the long term. We're here to make change in people's lives when we can.
Yeah.
Like recognizing the fact that like their majority is temporary and it may not be longer than 2 years, but like might as well just say screw it and do whatever the hell they can, even if it doesn't mean that they get elected in 2 years, but at least they did something and they have something to show for it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how more people should run in terms of politics.
I mean, that's kind of what's happened in Virginia too. Like back when
Yeah.
Virginia had the trifecta, they abolished the death penalty, they raised the minimum wage, they brought back, I believe they brought back collective bargaining. They did not overturn right to work, but I believe they did bring back collective bargaining. They legalized marijuana. Like there's a pretty decent package of progressive priorities that in that brief time in which they had the majority, they worked on getting stuff done, and Minnesota did even more. Like they did free school lunches.
But you have to admit, the bar is in hell for that one.
True, true. But
It's sad that we're celebrating these wins that are just like such basic things of like, oh yeah, that should probably be a thing.
But the point is, I think that gerrymandering, being against gerrymandering on both the Democratic level and a Republican level, is how you get better candidates that actually do something with their power.
For real.
You're gonna have higher quality candidates that have to actually be smart in their argumentation, and actually have to appeal to people, appeal to what is actually popular, in order to actually win. So
more accountable to their constituents.
Yeah, more accountable to their constituents. All right. That's ultimately, I think that that's the best conclusion to be drawn. And the fact that Republicans at this point are like blatantly just ignoring the Supreme Court's modest critique on their map. Like they said all you need is just two districts that are majority black, just two districts that are majority black in a state where like a third of the population is black. That is fucking modest. All right.
Yeah. And like, not to bring up he who shall not be named, DeSantis. You saw what happened in Florida this past week, right? Too.
I did not see it. No.
Oh my God. Yeah. No. So back when Florida redistricted, they gerrymandered the shit out of their state.
That I did know.
Like, yeah, they gerrymandered so badly. They flipped a ton of seats to the Republicans. But there's a federal judge under the same pretenses as Alabama called them out for racially gerrymandering one of their congressional seats, I think, like out of existence. And it was a black representative, and it like cracked the entire vote across like 5 or 6 different different counties and different congressional seats. And I'm interested to see what happens with that, because Ron DeSantis quite literally said, hey, state legislature, I'm making a map that I think you should pass. And the state legislator was like, hey, that's probably not cool, but we'll do it, I guess, Mr. DeSantis. And so they passed it, and now it's under the same scrutiny. So I'm interested to see if like that gets taken up to a higher court. And if that is the case, honestly, like with all these places that are having to redraw lines and with such a slim majority that's dividing the House, like I could easily see just basically redistricting cases swinging the like who's in control of the House in 2024, plain and simple.